Hello, welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to show you how you can get information regarding an IP address that you've got and then get information like country name, country code, and then the city and so on. In this presentation I'm getting information regarding a specific IP address representing the flag of that country and information about that country, like country code, latitude, longitude of the city that the IP address represents, and then the currency code and currency symbol and time zone. And also I have used latitude and longitude in an iframe Google map with a pinpoint of the location, as you can see here. So basically in this page there's a little form here that you can enter any IP address that you want. For example, if you go with this IP address and submit the form, now this time the IP address is from France, and information regarding this IP address, like the city is Paris, the continent is Europe, and so on. And accordingly the map pinpoint has been changed to country France, city Paris. So basically in this page is one little form and flag and some information about the IP address and the map of the pinpoint. For this video I'm using XAMPP. It's a local Linux server. I'm assuming that you know how to use XAMPP software. I have a different separate video on how to set up and run XAMPP and work with, and but in this video I'm assuming that you know how to use it. So we start with a blank PHP page inside XAMPP, and I'm using the Windows Notepad to do the coding like so. I have a file called presentation.php which at the moment shows a blank page. So we're gonna start with a small form on the page that actually intakes the IP address. If the IP address has been submitted, it's going to use the IP address. If not, it's going to use the IP address of the person who's browsing the page as a default IP address. So for the form HTML, we're going to use this code here, which it's a simple form tag, simple HTML form tag with the method of post. We don't define action attributes because we want to default it back to its own file. So if you don't define action attributes for the form tag, you're going to submit the form to itself. So if I save this and refresh the page, we're going to have a simple form with a submit button and a input element and a label that explains about this input element here. So basically we have a label, which is the enter IP address here, and the input element with ID of IP and name of IP, and we have another input as submit button, which is defined here, and we have closed the form like so. So this is a small little form tag, HTML tag. I'm going to save this, and at the moment it does nothing. So if you select IP addresses and By the way, these IP addresses which you can see here is the one that I have previously input into the input element, and it's one of those autofill drop down items. So if I go with this IP address here and press submit, it goes nowhere. So we're gonna need another extra piece of code in PHP to define what happens next. So to do that, I need a tag for PHP and close the tag like so, and give enough room for PHP codes here. And if I put a piece of code like so, so basically what we're saying here is if the post parameter IP has been set or submitted, define an IP address which equals to the IP parameter, and if it's not set, the IP variable equals the user's IP address who's browsing the website. So if we're going to test, we need to echo out the IP variable like so. And if I save this and refresh the page, this time we have the IP address. So if I select this IP address and submit, we're going to have that IP address. And if we don't have any IP address, and if I just simply go to the page, we're going to have the default IP address of the local server. Because I'm running XAMPP on my local server, we're going to have 127.0.0.1, which is the local IP address of your machine, every machine that runs XAMPP. So if I don't enter any IP address here, and if I go to this page, it's going to show the default IP address of the user. And if I define an IP address and submit the form, it's going to use that IP address. Next step is to, let's get rid of the echo, is to use an API to grab information about that IP address. For that, there is a website called geoplugin.net which intakes a parameter IP, and you equal this IP parameter to the IP variable that you just got here. So basically what it does, I'm going to show you in a second. If I go to this website, geoplugin.net, and if I enter it here, and if I define an IP parameter, for example, Germany, like so, and if I enter, it will take a while. Basically, this website output a JSON string with key values regarding that IP address. So basically, this is the key, and this is the value, and this is the key, and this is the value. So whenever you call this key, you're going to get a value of this amount. So what happens, so what I have done here is I have input the IP address into the parameter of this website, geoplugin.net, and I have decode that JSON string through the PHP function which you've got here, and I have inputted into a variable object which I defined it here. So every time I call to this variable by the key name here, I'm going to get the value of that key extracted from this JSON for that IP address into the country variable here. For country code, I'm using country code key, and so on. I'm getting information about that IP address through the API of this website here. So now we have variables that representing information about that IP address that we've got here, and presented to this website here. Grabs it out through this function here, and decode the JSON and put it into this variable here. And later on, we're using these variables to simplify the whole key out of this object variable here. So if I go ahead and echo out an HTML code within PHP code that we have here, like so, I'm going to remove this bit for the time being. It's the flag. And if I save this and refresh the page, this time we're going to have information regarding that IP address, which is here. Yeah, I forgot to remove the iframe for the Google map. So it's like so. We're going to have information about that IP address. So now next step is to use another website called flagcdn.com to extract the flag of the country based on the country code variable that we've got here. The format for that API, that flag API, is like this, which in this case is Canada, and the width of the flag is 40 pixel, and then the alternate text for the image is going to be the country Canada. And this is the website that actually outputs the PNG file based on the country code, and you can define the width of 40 pixel. And what happens here is if I put this image tag outside of PHP code inside of HTML area, and if I save and if I refresh, we're gonna have Canada's flag here, like so, as you can see. But we're gonna make it more dynamic based on the IP address that we have, so I'm gonna show you how you can do that. So we're gonna use this format, but we're gonna manipulate this part, which is country code, this part, and this part. So basically the piece of code goes like this, which exactly the same format that I showed you previously, except for the country code before PNG extension inside of the string. We're gonna add the country code variable into lowercase function, through lowercase function. This is a PHP function that makes the string lowercase, because in here, as you can see, the country code is all capital letters, which doesn't work with the flag API. So we're going to convert it to lowercase string, and we're going to put it just before PNG extension within the string here that we're echoing out. So every time you echo out a string, if you want to add a PHP variable, you have to close with a notation, with a quotation mark, and then put a dot to add the variable, and then put another dot to add the rest of the string, and then you have to open the quotation mark and then the rest of the string. This goes with the other country code that we need, within the string, and also the country variable, the country name for the alternate attribute for the image tag here. So if I save this and refresh, we're gonna have United Kingdom's flag based on this IP address, and this is United Kingdom. As you can see here, the flag is accordingly represents the country United Kingdom. So next part is to add the Google Map section. For that, there's a piece of code that basically is the Google Map embed code, which goes like this. Again, this is an iframe pointing to Google Map with a Q parameter of latitude and longitude, and with a zoom level of 15, and you're defining a width of 360 pixel and height of 270 pixel, and iframe has no frames border. And just to make sure that the border wouldn't appear on your page, you define a style attribute and define the border thickness as 0 pixel, and you close the iframe. So if I save this, we're gonna have the location of the IP address in United Kingdom, which is in the middle of a river. It is not accurate. The accuracy is 1000 meter. It's just representing the city and rough area of the IP address that we've got. But if you go with other IP addresses, it might be a little bit more accurate. So for in this case, if you go to France, the location again is not that accurate. It looks like it's in the middle of the park. It's just basically represents the region that the person is browsing, or the IP address is representing that region. It's not that accurate. So if you go ahead and put this zoom into, say, 3, arbitrarily 3, and then save and refresh, we're going to zoom out into France. You can see France as a country in the map with the pinpoint of the location of the IP address here. So what I have done here for the latitude, I have used, as you can see, the latitude here is 4-digit after decimal point, which is, according to Google, it needs to be 6-digit. So what I have done here, I have used a function called number function in PHP and entered the latitude with and defined 6-digit after decimal point, and this is an empty string for separating thousand, because in financial format we need to separate thousands by comma, but in our case we don't need to separate thousands by comma, so we just put an empty quotation, open and close quotations with an empty string inside of it. And then same thing with longitude and zoom level and the rest of the HTML code that I explained earlier. So this is basically what I have come up with the presentation for the IP address and detecting country and some information regarding that IP address. Of course, you can go ahead and use this information in your own application in so many ways that you prefer, but this is how I used this information and presented in this layout. I hope this video helped you. If you have any question, you can reach out through my website, positivenation.com.au, And if you want to see the source code with this presentation, you can search on my website positivenation.com.au, identifying IP address, countries based on IP addresses. On that article, you can actually download the source code for this. If you like this video, please subscribe and hit the bell button. Thanks for your support. Have a wonderful day. Thanks.